The American way of life today is drastically different than that of the mid-20th century. Back then, families gathered around their television to watch The Ed Sullivan Show. The early days of rock and roll played on jukeboxes. Milk was delivered to your doorstep. And doctor's appointments looked something like this. Back then, the polio vaccine was being developed. The first open heart surgery took place in Philadelphia. And you had one doctor, your family doctor, who provided all aspects of your care. If you didn't feel well enough to go into the office, they came to your house for a house call. They provided passionate and personal care because they knew you, really knew you, not only as a patient, but as a friend and a neighbor. This was a very special relationship. Feelings of trust, knowledge, regard, and loyalty didn't have to be sought out. They were instinctive. Now today, that relationship looks a little bit different. You may wait weeks for an appointment, and when you finally arrive, you will spend, on average, just 13 minutes with your doctor. And as you talk to them, they may be looking at a computer screen, typing and taking notes about your symptoms. The doctor you see today may be a different doctor from who you see at your next appointment, because a practice now has dozens of caregivers. With just one click, your prescription is sent off to the pharmacy, and your after-visit summary is emailed to you via a patient portal. Now, some of these things are great, but what happened to that relationship? 40% of millennials today feel that if they passed their primary care physician on the street, he or she would not recognize them. Trust, loyalty, how can these things exist if we can't even spend enough time together to remember each other's names? The world of high-touch relationships have changed to high-tech relationships. Now, that's not to say there isn't great things that come with medical advancements. We have new treatments, new technologies, better outcomes, higher mortality rates, but at the same time, the patient relationship is being impacted. Interaction today has dramatically changed. When thinking of the patient satisfaction, a recent survey found that 35% of patients, only 1/3 of patients, feel completely satisfied with their care provider. And half of them feel that their doctor doesn't care about them or communicates well. Our industry is named simply with 2 words, health and care. And it seems we are seriously falling short on the care. So in order to talk about patient satisfaction and to improve on patient satisfaction, we must first define it. Patient satisfaction is far more than numbers that are read after a survey is completed. Patient satisfaction examines the quality of care that a doctor provides through the patient's perspective. And it's not just about outcomes. The University of Wisconsin did a study that looked at people who had positive surgical outcomes, meaning their surgery went well, the issue was taken care of, and they're generally in good health afterwards. And then they looked at patient satisfaction. And what they found is that there wasn't necessarily a correlation between positive outcomes and patient satisfaction. In fact, what they found was that the relationship between a doctor and their patient, as well as the care and compassion they felt they received, had almost an equal effect on how well they were satisfied. Many of us today forget just how important that medical relationship is. And it's not just with a patient and a doctor. It's with the nurse. It's with the person at the front desk who checks you in, or even whoever was on the phone who scheduled your appointment. We are longing for that feeling of old-fashioned relationships, but we know we need and want the technology of today. So to rebuild that relationship, we have to go back to the qualities that made it special to begin with: trust, knowledge, regard, and loyalty. The foundations of a successful relationship have not changed. Only the tools to build them have. Now, one of those tools that I'm sure we all know about is the online patient portal. At my organization, we have over 170,000 people subscribed to our portal. And by far, the most used function is the secure messaging tool. It allows patients to communicate with their doctor anytime and any place. But a possible downfall of this is that often, when you message your doctor, you receive a message back from one of their care teams. Now, we in the medical community know how important a team approach is. But if we're going to involve that team, we need to make the connection. Doctors, make sure you are introducing your team to the patient. When you invite them to message you on the portal, tell them that you will read their message, but one of your knowledgeable and valuable team members may be the one replying. Patients, if you don't know who's responding to you, you have no idea if you should listen to them, say something. A doctor will trust their team, but you will not necessarily trust a nameless face behind a computer. Trust has to be built. If you're the person who is replying to messages on a portal, make sure you introduce yourself. Basic Communication 101. Introduce yourself and then mention the doctor's name. That will build on the communication and the connection that the doctor has already put in place. Now, I hear often that patients are not receiving the attention that they crave from their doctor. And I get it, but I often ask this question. Look around. See all the cell phones on the table? When's the last time you went to dinner or to a meeting and you didn't have that cell phone next to you? Our friends and our family are constantly battling with technology for our attention every day. And doctors feel that same struggle for attention between their patients and technology. It's important that we put ourselves in someone else's shoes, and it can illuminate an entirely different perspective. And at the end of the day, empathy puts all of us on the same playing field. Now, one thing I want to emphasize here, trust and regard, they have to work both ways. Of course, a patient should trust their care team. They did go to school for like 8 years. But in today's world, the internet has made us all researchers of our own lives and health. A study in the Patient Education and Counseling Journal found that a majority of patients today are taking to Google to research their symptoms prior to and reading more about their diagnosis after the appointment. Now, doctors, it's easy to disregard this research. It is often incomplete or incorrect. But we need to embrace the idea that this behavior is commonplace. When you're in an appointment, make sure you ask your patient, what do you think about your symptoms or your condition? And why do you think that way? On average, a patient is interrupted just 12 seconds after speaking to their doctor. Now, I understand the clock is ticking, but when you are face-to-face with a patient, you need to make eye contact. listen to what they have to say, and acknowledge it. Patients, you have a responsibility as well. Be honest with your doctor. Tell them what you've been reading and where you've been getting that information. You can admit that it was from WebMD, that's fine. It's the doctor's responsibility to make sure that you are educated with the right materials. Ask the doctor to provide you online resources so that when you go home at night, you can read more from a source your doctor trusts. It's the responsibility of both groups, doctors and patients, to respect and to recognize the knowledge that each other holds. So you may have noticed a lot of the things I'm talking about today are blending together. When you share your knowledge with people, you earn respect. Respect gives way to regard. Regard in both the real world and the online space becomes trust. And trust will ultimately lead to loyalty. So loyalty is a really interesting thing in the medical world. Back in the day, we didn't have to worry about loyalty. You would never leave a doctor unless he or she retired or died. But at the end of the day, we know that that behavior today is very, very different. A Deloitte study found that 88% of people today would not hesitate to leave their caregiver if they were dissatisfied. Now, we in the medical field know it is far easier and less costly to engage the patients we have than to seek out and find new ones. So our job is to give the patients a reason to stay. And the way that we do that is by reaching them on the channels that they are already communicating on. That same survey found that in today's world, a majority of people trust social media for opinions of doctors, hospitals, and health systems. Now, those of us here know social media is not a trend, it is not a fad. Social media has changed the way that we communicate with each other, and it is not going away. So, doctors, you possess a knowledge in your area unlike anyone else. So why not show it off on social media? If you don't have the time to manage your own social profiles, which I get, talk to the marketing department at your organization. Tell them you want to be more visible on social media. I guarantee you they will welcome you with open arms. It's very important that as a physician, as a caregiver, the topics that your patients are talking to you about and asking you about can be found on social media. Patients, please go out and find the social profiles of your doctors, your hospitals, and your health systems. If you are going on those channels and finding content, you will know it is reliable and from the care team that you already trust. Now, another thing I want everyone to do is make sure you are using social media to talk about your medical experiences. Everyone says, I don't want to write an online review unless I had a bad experience. But today, people want to read it all, the good, the bad, and even the average. When you take just a minute to share your experience, it can have immense influence on someone else's as well. So earlier today, I had talked to you about what the medical relationships of the past looked like. And I compared it to a very different look of today's relationship. So before I finish, I want us all to think ahead and envision a future. Today, the doctor-patient relationship is at a crossroads. We are feeling nostalgia for a connection that has not kept up with the fast-paced culture it needs to exist in today. Technology is obviously here to stay, but that doesn't mean good communication has to go away. If we embrace the digital world while staying true to those qualities that made the old-fashioned relationship special, trust, knowledge, regard, and loyalty, then everyone wins. Human relationships are deep, complex, and often very difficult entities. But if we use technology not as a replacement, but as an aid, these relationships can be richer and more meaningful. We can get back to the feelings of personal connections between our doctors and our patients. We can make that communication easier and more frequent. If we all commit to working on that relationship, both in person and in the online world, not only will patient satisfaction improve, but also our well-being as a whole. Thank you.